Hey everyone, how's it going? Welcome back to another Walking Dead video. So in this one here, I wanted to talk about actually Scott Gimple's comments recently on the future of The Walking Dead. And he also talked about the timeline of Dead City. And that's something I do want to talk about because I know that that is a criticism of Dead City just in general. You know, even going to the very first season was this show was set so far into the future, like it doesn't make a lot of sense with the Ones Who Lives timeline and The Walking Dead Daryl Dixon's timeline, right? So I do want to talk about all of that there because he actually said something here that I've been kind of saying, but this was like the first confirmation that we've had really from him that, yeah, we'll talk about that here in this video. So before going further, make sure to be a subscriber if you do want to get all my Walking Dead content like this. And also I will be having the 100th episode of the podcast that we've been doing for the last like almost 2 years now. It's going to be out. Honestly, the podcast is just something that I really do enjoy doing just in general. And it's just a lot of fun and it's going to be, you know, reinvented, I would say, in the next like week or two here. And so, yeah, I just wanted to shout out the pod and definitely go make sure to be a subscriber if you haven't subscribed to that already. But yeah, let's just get into this here. So I saw this here in an interview with Screen Rant, and I guess Scott Gimple, answered some questions here, and there's a lot of questions about the timeline and everything of Dead City, and so let's get into that aspect to it first, like the timeline of Dead City, and then we'll talk about, you know, I guess the future of The Walking Dead and like crossovers and all of that, because Gimple says something here that is interesting because it really has changed quite a bit, I would say, in the last year. But first, let's get into what he says about Dead City's timeline here. So, Screen Rant basically just kind of says, like, Dead City has the luxury of being the show that is the furthest ahead in the timeline. And then Gimple just kind of goes in and says, I'm going to jump in there. I would say talk of the timeline outside the premise or the story unfolding on screen itself is all speculative. Is it that far ahead? Someone might say, well, look at Herschel. And I'd be like, well, look at Carl. I would say the timeline of The Walking Dead occurs in somewhat of a dreamlike space. And this is something that I've said for quite a while in terms of the timeline for The Walking Dead. Well, I guess the one thing I said a lot is like, it doesn't really matter because like wherever they want the story to take place is just going to be where it's going to take place. Like, you know, I look at Fear the Walking Dead. It was set so far in the past for like a long time, even like season 7. And then all of a sudden in season 8, they jump forward basically to catch up with The Walking Dead's timeline. And so, you know, it's really just because of the story. They wanted Morgan to be around that timeline there in case Morgan, you know, shows up in one of these shows. And yes, Dead City is set in the future, but like, to me, again, it's one of those things where if, you know, they all reunite, they're all just going to be there. Like, there's a reason Maggie and Negan don't mention Rick and Michonne or Daryl and Carol. It's because nothing is worked out in terms of where the story is. And I do think that Scott Gimple really wants to keep it like that because if there's some sort of thing that's announced by AMC, they're able to sort of change things with the story. And that's why I think that things are very just like, where are all these characters? What is happening? Do these characters know about this or that? And I think that is something that definitely, I would say, hurts The Walking Dead overall. Like, I think that Gimple should have more of a, I guess, not timeline worked out, but more of the story worked out with where the characters are at or like what the characters know at certain times, right? Like, I think that would honestly be totally fine to say. And I think that's the thing with these shows is like, you look at The Ones Who Live and like Rick never mentioned Daryl at all, right? Like there was no mention of Daryl and it's just, I mean, it doesn't really make a lot of sense at all. And I feel like there he definitely could have said something like, where's Daryl kind of thing, right? Or like, you know, so it is one of those things that is just like, what do characters know at certain points? And like Carol as well, right? Like that was one thing where Carol mentioned like, oh, he came back or whatever, or we thought that's what she said, but I guess it was the feelings came back or whatever, right? And so that's one thing right there. Like now that's confirmation that Carol doesn't know that Rick and Michonne made it back, right? And so like that was one, I guess, moment where, you know, we did get that confirmation there because obviously they don't really do that quite a bit, but like Maggie and Negan, I don't think they know that Rick and Michonne made it back. I really don't. And like, I don't know if they're ever going to mention it until Gimple knows exactly what is happening. Like, I think if they know how the reunion endgame story is going to play out, then he'll be a lot more confident to be like, all right, they can mention this or that. But I think because he doesn't really know how it's going to play out, if it's going to be like, you know, The Walking Dead season 12 or an endgame series or just like, you know, it's kind of hard for them to say I think, you know, what exactly is happening. And I think that's why Maggie or Negan don't really mention certain things, because they want to keep it where it's like, once they're working on that story, it's, you know, they can say whatever they want and it's not going to mess up something that was said beforehand. And so to me, I think things like that are frustrating. I think that Maggie or Negan, they could mention something about like, you know, well, Rick made it back or whatever. And then it's like, okay, so we never saw them reunite, but I guess they reunited off screen. I think a scene like that would be pretty cool. But also, if you do want to see them reunite for the first time, then maybe have it in the story where Maggie, you know, basically after, I guess, she left the Commonwealth, you know, like she left right away and she hasn't had any contact with anybody back there. Like something like that would make it so that, okay, so she doesn't know at all, right? Or Negan, I mean, it makes a lot of sense for him too as well. He just sort of left. And so it would make sense that he wouldn't know anything at all. Like any mention of any of that would just be like, okay, so they have no idea that they made it back at all. I think that's the thing that's frustrating with the timeline of everything here. And so when Gimple talks about the timeline here, and it's sort of, I guess, or what he says here, in somewhat of a dreamlike space, like I think it's just because he wants that freedom there, honestly, to be able to do whatever he wants with the story once they actually get to a moment like that, right? And not have it where it's like, okay, so now this can't happen. What do we do because this was mentioned before? Like, we have to have that somehow included here. And I think that it's just happened way too much now where it's just like not a lot of confirmation of a lot of things happening. And then it just, I don't know, it's frustrating, right? Like, obviously that's one thing that, like, when we were watching Dead City and The Walking Dead Daryl Dixon, it was like, what do these characters know about Rick and Michonne? Like, do they know that they made it back? And obviously Daryl doesn't know at this point here. And so Laurent went back to the Commonwealth. Like, if you notice, the whole thing with all of this is everyone just wants more connections with all of the shows because it makes it really exciting. Like, that's all everyone wants here. The stories here are good. It's just that people want a little bit more than that because they want things to feel a little bit more connected because that's what we're used to here. And I think, you know, The Walking Dead Dead City Season 2, that was sort of my issue with it. I still haven't done a full season review yet, but looking back at the whole season, I enjoyed that story, but there wasn't a lot of connections to anything else. And I think that's one thing that made it feel, it wasn't pointless, because I think the point that we got to at the very end with Maggie and Negan is something that is going to be really awesome going forward because the characters will actually work together and a lot of that stuff is just put behind them now. And so I think that it's actually going to be really exciting going forward, but it's just, you know, overall with The Walking Dead, there was nothing they really did overall, really. Like, you look at The Walking Dead Daryl Dixon Season 2, like, as much as you can criticize how some of the story ended there, like Laurent and Ash going back to the Commonwealth, you know, a lot of the mentions of Judith and a lot of things like that, like, it did feel like the story was very much connected to The Walking Dead. And Dead City felt very disconnected, you know, at least season 2 did anyways. And so that would be my criticism of that season. And again, I think it all comes back to Scott Gimple and what he is saying here about the timeline here and it occurring in somewhat of a dreamlike space, because they just sort of choose when they want to do things. And that is something that I do like. Like, that's why I think that overall Dead City is, you know, it's set a couple of years into the future, but I don't think it's going to matter in the end, because when they all reunite, it's just going to be at this time here. But I think that freedom that, you know, Gimple, you know, seems to like in terms of the writing and everything of the story, I think also is hurting the show right now overall, because it does need to feel a little bit more connected than it is. I want to get into the thing here that Scott Gimple said about, I guess, crossovers and everything, or just the future and like all the characters reuniting. And so Screen Rant said, sort of in response to all of that, given that loose timeline, then are you talking about integrating any of these spinoffs? Could Maggie or Negan travel to see what Daryl and Carol are up to? And then Scott Gimple replies with, I've said over and over that my dream for many years, the plan all along in many ways, has been to see these characters cross, whether it be in small ways or big ways. There have been circumstances, timing, all sorts of things, network wishes even, that got in front of that a little bit over the years. That said, these shows have been establishing themselves, and that's a great thing too. So I guess I'd say I'd love to see it. And, you know, my takeaway from that, I guess, the first part there is, you know, I've been reading a lot of his comments on, like, you know, all of them wanting to reunite and all that. And I do feel like in the beginning, after The Walking Dead was over, it wasn't necessarily just like, oh yeah, it was my dream to, do this or whatever. I think Scott Gimple has been saying that a lot more recently, where it's like, yeah, I want all these characters to be, together and reunite and all that. Before, it was just more like, it would be cool, this and that. And I think more recently it's been like, yeah, I would love to see it, this and that. And I guess it's just what he says here, right? Like, the plan all along in many ways has been to see these characters cross, whether it be in small ways or big ways. And so, like, that really wasn't a lot of what he was saying before. Like, I do remember there being, like, I don't remember exactly what he was saying, but there wasn't a lot of confidence there. Like, now he's saying, like, the plan all along was to have these characters cross, or like, well, I guess, whether or not it's in small ways or big ways. Like, to me, there's a lot more confidence in what he's saying. So I feel like he knows a little bit more of what's going on. And obviously everyone wants to do that now. And so I do think that that is something that they are building to right now. And we'll just have to see, when that gets announced. Like, I really hope that this month here at Comic-Con that a lot more stuff is announced. Like, I don't really know what specifically, if it's going to be another spin-off, but I just want there to be a lot more connections and talk about the future of where things are going, right? I think we need some more, I guess, just like direction on everything here. Like, I'm enjoying the story and stuff right now. It is a lot of fun. Honestly, I do really like the story, but like, we want to see where things are going. And like, yes, Scott Gimple did mention here in this interview, like, the shows are establishing themselves. And I think, he does like that aspect to it, where it's like the shows are its own thing with its own characters. But I still think that you do also have to realize that the shows are a part of something much bigger than just that, right? Like, it's cool if the shows have their own characters there, and it's like this different world in each show, but there's also like this bigger story throughout all of the shows that I think is very important not to ignore. And yeah, again, obviously that's one thing I've been saying throughout this video that I think they have ignored quite a bit. But it seems like, something has changed for The Walking Dead, because Scott Gimple is now saying that the plan all along, in many ways, has been to see these characters cross, whether it be in small ways or big ways. And so we'll just have to wait and see, I guess, what that means overall and where that goes in the next couple of years. And so I'm excited for Comic-Con. That's like, what, 3 weeks away now, or less than that now. And I hope we get some news on just other things. Like, I don't want news. I mean, obviously I do want news on Dead City Season 3, or even a Season 4 if it's going to be the last season. If The Walking Dead Daryl Dixon gets renewed for Season 4, like, I just want to see a lot more stuff besides that. Like, just talk about, like, these characters here or other ideas. Like, they announced the whole, like, more tales from the Walking Dead universe. Like, what happened with that? They announced that, what, 2-3 years ago, and it just went away. Like, I want there to be more talk about all of that there. And so, yeah, we'll have to wait and see. But overall, yeah, I think that, Scott Gimple's comments here regarding the whole, like, timeline and, it occurring in somewhat of a dreamlike space is something that I've always said, and it's one thing that I think benefits The Walking Dead, where they can just sort of tell any sort of story whenever they want, and it'll just work out in terms of the timeline. But it's also one of those things that hurts The Walking Dead, because there's not a lot of mentions of things, and then it just gets really, upsetting, I guess, watching the show, and you're just like, well, there was no mention of this or that, right? So anyways, post all your thoughts down below. Hope you all enjoyed the video, and I'll see you in the next one.